The Roman Empire was one of the most powerful and long-lasting empires in history. But how did it fall? I'm your host, and you're watching this channel. And today, we'll find out what caused the downfall of Rome, one of the major factors leading to the decline and fall of the Roman Empire was internal political instability and corruption. Over time, the number of emperors decreased from about 30 to 180 A.D. to roughly 40 to 50 from 284 to 395 A.D. There were fewer than 30 emperors during the first 3 centuries of the empire, yet after the crisis of the 3rd century there were almost 1 emperor per decade. You may be asking yourself why this happened. Well, during the first 2 centuries of the empire, the army appointed the emperor, which helped to ensure that only qualified candidates became emperor. However, by the 3rd century, the number of emperors increased so much that family members began killing each other just to take the throne. For example, Elagabalus killed his grandfather, his grandmother Julia Maesa, his own father, Julius Maecenas, even his own mother, Julia Maesa, so he could become emperor. Another example is that Licinius killed his cousin Emperor Valerian for the same reason. So because of all the civil wars between these royal families, the Roman Empire became very unstable. Also, if an emperor did not have any legitimate heirs, the Praetorian Guard would select someone from the Senate and force them to become emperor. This also led to more instability, because many of these new emperors had no clue what they were doing. One of these senators who became emperor was Marcus Junius Brutus, who famously assassinated Caesar. The assassination of Caesar was the turning point of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. But despite being such a powerful man, Brutus was not fit to rule. His decisions were always wrong. He devalued the currency, which led to inflation. He also squandered the treasury by giving money to prostitutes and chariot drivers. In addition to that, he gave the Parthians back the provinces that Crassus lost in the Roman-Parthian War. So you can see how unfit he was to rule Rome. He didn't know anything about governing a province or waging war. These are the basic things that every emperor should have known. Another factor that contributed to the fall of Rome was its economic troubles. The Roman economy was based on slavery. Slaves were used for almost everything, like working on farms, making goods, fighting in the military, and even governing the provinces. Rome acquired most of their slaves through conquest. However, as the empire grew, it became harder to conquer new territories and acquire new slaves. As a result, the price of slaves rose steadily over the years. By the 3rd century, the price of a slave had risen so much that it was no longer profitable to own slaves. Therefore, the productivity of Roman agriculture declined, and so did the Roman economy. Also, the growth of cities and the increase in population led to more people competing for jobs, thus lowering wages. The abundance of cheap goods produced by slaves also encouraged overconsumption. The Romans didn't save any money for the future. They lived for the moment. This lack of foresight also contributed to the fall of Rome. The spending of the Roman military was another factor in the fall of the empire. Rome maintained a large military to protect its borders and to conquer new lands. However, as the empire grew, it became harder and harder to supply and manage such a large military. As a result, the quality of the Roman legions decreased. The legions were supposed to be made up of elite soldiers who were well-trained and disciplined. However, by the 3rd century, the legions were made up of conscripts who were poorly trained and equipped. This decline in the quality of the Roman legions made it harder to defend the empire's borders, and soon hordes of barbarians were pouring into Roman territory. Speaking of barbarians, let's talk about how their invasions contributed to the fall of Rome. During the first 3 centuries of the empire, Rome was able to keep the barbarians out. However, as the legions became weaker, it became harder to stop the barbarian migrations. The first barbarian tribe to invade Italy was the Visigoths in 376. The Visigoths were a Germanic people who migrated from Scandinavia to Italy. They asked Rome for permission to settle in the Balkans, but Alaric, the king of the Visigoths, refused. Instead, he decided to invade Italy. Despite being outnumbered, the Roman legions led by Valens were defeated at the Battle of Adrianople in 378. This defeat was a turning point in the history of Rome. It showed that the legions were no longer the invincible force that they once were. After the Battle of Adrianople, the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410, even though Rome had been attacked before. This was the first time a Gothic tribe had invaded and sacked the city. This invasion and sack led to widespread panic throughout the empire. People thought that Rome was doomed. Actually, they were right. After the Visigoths, other barbarian tribes started sacking Rome. In 425, the Vandals sacked Rome. In 455, the Suebi sacked Rome. And finally, in 476, the last official Germanic sack of Rome took place when the king of the Vandals, Theodoric the Great, plundered the city. Besides these attacks, Rome was also suffering from piracy. The Mediterranean Sea had always been full of pirates, but during the later empire, piracy became a big problem. The reason for this was the decline of the Roman navy. The navy was supposed to patrol the seas and protect trade, but it was never strong enough to do that. This allowed pirates to roam the seas and attack Roman ships. Piracy was especially rampant in the western provinces, which were further away from the center of the empire. As a result, trade declined, and the economy of the western provinces suffered. As you can see, many factors were weakening the Roman Empire. Internal problems like the instability of the government, the decline of the economy, and the decrease in the quality of the army. External threats like barbarian invasions and piracy were also hurting the empire. So at this point, you must be wondering, what was the final blow that brought down the empire? Was it the sack of Rome by the Vandals in 455? No, it actually happened earlier. In 395 AD, Emperor Theodosius I divided the empire into two halves. The Eastern Empire centered around Constantinople, and the Western Empire centered around Rome. Theodosius did this because he realized that the western half of the empire was becoming weaker and weaker, while the eastern half was still strong. He hoped that by separating the two halves, they could continue to thrive independently of each other. Unfortunately for Rome, this was the beginning of the end. The division of the empire meant that Rome was no longer the center of the Roman world. Constantinople was now the new capital of the empire. Most of the government officials and the wealthy elite moved to Constantinople, leaving Rome with few resources. This economic and political decline led to the rapid deterioration of Rome. Within the next 80 years, the Western Roman Empire would collapse, and Italy would become a part of the Ostrogothic kingdom. If you want to learn more about the history of Rome, click here. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching.